Reinforcements have arrived. New construction options. Building. Construction complete. New construction options. Building. Construction complete. New construction options. Building. Unable to comply.
Ready
Building
and at once.
Training. Unit ready.
Ready and
Unit
green.
ready. Training.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Training.
Affirmative.
Unit ready. Training.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Unit
Yes,
ready.
sir. Very well. Awaiting orders. Reporting. Very well. At once. Agreed. Affirmative. Agreed. At once.
Our base is under attack.
Awaiting orders. Agreed. Very well.
Construction complete. Training. New construction options.
Agreed. Of course. Reporting. Acknowledge. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Very well. Yes, sir. Reporting. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Very well. Agreed. 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 Yes, sir. Affirmative. Very well. Affirmative. 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 Very well. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Agreed. Of course. At once. At once. Affirmative. 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 Very well. Affirmative. At once. At once.
Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir. Very well. Reporting. At once. Very well. Very well. Agreed. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ready and waiting. Agreed. At once. Yes, sir.
Our base is
Waiting
under
affirmative.
attack.
At once. Ready and very well. Very well.
Construction complete. New construction options. Low power. Building. Building.
Waiting order. Very well.
Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Unit ready. Building. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Agreed. Awaiting order. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. New construction options. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building. Building. Construction complete. Building. Unit ready. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Vehicle report. Affirmative.
Building. Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle report.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready. Building. Building. Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. At once. Agreed. Agreed.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Waiting on. Yes, sir. Agreed.
Construction options. Low power. Building. Unit lost.
Awaiting order. Agreed. At once.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Of course. Reporting. Awaiting order. At once.
Construction complete. Building. Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Vehicle affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Ready and waiting. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Agreed.
Unit ready. Construction complete.
Awaiting order. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building. Building. Unit ready. Building. Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir.
On hold. Cancel.
Awaiting order. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Building.
Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack. Unit
Acknowledge.
lost.
Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Construction complete.
Acknowledge.
Unit lost.
Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Waiting orders. Acknowledge. Waiting orders. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Unit
Acknowledge.
ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Building.
Reporting. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Building.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Building.
Acknowledge. Affirm. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Acknowledge.
Building.
Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative.
Our
Affirmative.
base is under attack.
Acknowledge.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Unit lost. Construction complete. Building.
Take that once. Very well.
Unit ready. Construction complete. Building. Unit lost.
Waiting order. At once. Reporting.
On hold. Cancel. Building. Unit lost. Building.
Yes,
Unit
sir.
lost. Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Construction complete. Building. Building.
Vehicle reporting.
Unit ready. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Unit ready. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Building. Construction complete. Building. Unit ready. Building. Construction complete. Building. Unit ready. Construction complete. Building.
Vehicle reporting.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Unit ready. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready. Building.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
On hold. Cancelled. Unable to comply. Building in progress. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Our base is under attack. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
lost.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit
Affirmative.
lost.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit
Reporting.
lost.
Very well. Very well. Affirmative. At once. Affirmative. Very well. Yes, sir.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit
Awaiting order.
lost.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. At once. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack. Unit ready. Building.
Awaiting orders.
Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Vehicle report acknowledged.
Waiting orders.
Acknowledged. Waiting.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting orders.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting affirmative.
Orders. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Vehicle
reporting.
acknowledged.
Vehicle. Affirmative. Vehicle.
Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Mission accomplished.